it's great to have you. And, it's been about a month since Russia invaded Ukraine, and it has not been nearly as easy for Vladimir Putin as he probably expected. So what do you think the Chinese Communist Party is thinking now?
Well, you can bet they're thinking some of the same things Putin's thinking. This isn't going quite the way everybody planned it. They're even probably thinking what the U.S. government is thinking. Well, this isn't the way we thought it would work. It seems like everybody thought Ukraine would roll over in about 3 or 4 days. So you can bet that Xi Jinping and the Chinese are going back to the drawing boards and figuring out what it is they need to do differently. And that's the important thing here is there's a tendency in some quarters to think, well, the Chinese have seen what a hard time the Russians have had in Ukraine. So therefore, the Chinese or Xi Jinping is going to lay off of Taiwan. He's just going to give up. It's too hard. But no, I don't think he has changed his intentions one bit towards Taiwan. They're just going to try to do things differently.
It's interesting you put it like that, Grant, because I'm now thinking about how, when the Soviet Union fell, the Chinese Communist Party wasn't like, oh, well, I guess we give up. We're done for. They're like, what are the things that Gorbachev screwed up? What are the things the Soviets screwed up? And how can we never make those mistakes? And to, a pretty large degree, the Communist Party has really come out on top. They haven't made those same mistakes, and they've survived an additional 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the end of history. So that's a little scary.
Oh, that's really it's really the right way to look at it. And there's one sort of anecdote that's I use as a benchmark, and it's from 40 years ago, that when China was just coming out of that hellhole of Maoist rule, Gang of Four, Cultural Revolution, that they sent these 3 or 4 legal scholars, such as there is in China, to Los Angeles to visit UCLA to learn about how a law school runs or how a legal system runs. And I remember that the host who took them around, these 4 guys and these little guys in the snazzy Mao suits and the hats, and those guys, he took them around LA and showed them around. And they drove by Chavez Ravine, where the Los Angeles Dodgers play. And one of the guys said, we've heard that the Japanese play baseball and they're pretty good at it, so we don't play it. But if China ever took it up, we would be really good if the Japanese are. And they have the same impression of the Russians, the peasants in suits, that, well, the Russians may have had a hard time in Ukraine or with running an economy, everything else, but we're Chinese. We'll get it right. So that to me is I've always remembered that. And as I said, that the Chinese Communist Party has not given up their intentions towards Taiwan one bit.
Do you think that I think I've seen some commentary about how Russia's war in Ukraine is a deterrent for China invading Taiwan. Do you think people are overstating that deterrent?
Yes, I'm afraid so. As I say, they're going to have to do some things differently. If you go down the list of things that that didn't happen the way the Russians and everyone else thought they would, that almost all of them apply to an invasion of an assault on Taiwan.
So what are they going to do differently, do you think?
Well, first, they look at what has happened to the Russians. That they were expecting that just by knocking Taiwan around a bit.
You mean in Ukraine, that is?
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
And they would be able to remove the leadership. They were to discombobulate entire command and control. They also thought that the Russian subversion, the covert action beforehand, would sort of prep the Ukrainians for a quick seizure. So they thought just hit them hard, get some troops in, get some armor in, use your air force to shoot up the Ukrainians. That the place would collapse, and then the West might complain, the Americans and the EU might complain, but certainly the EU wouldn't do anything because look at that. The Germans have no military, basically. They've just addicted to Russian oil with the Nord Stream pipelines. And NATO and Ukraine and the EU, they just can't get their acts together. So there'll be some complaining, but they'll get over it. And we'll be back to normal. And then you'll see that all it's gone in a day, or maybe it's over a weekend pretty much. People forget about it. We're back to business as usual. And that's what the Russians were expecting. I think that's kind of like what the Chinese were expecting if they went after Taiwan. And yet what they didn't anticipate really was that this sort of sudden missile bombardment would just cause the opposition to give up. Additionally, all of the political warfare, the subversion that's going on in Taiwan and has been for a long time with the media, academia, and the political classes trying to intimidate and frighten the population. Well, maybe that hasn't worked as well as they were counting on it. And then they see, well, maybe if we, say we do get an amphibious assault, the amphibious force that gets across the strait, put it on Taiwan and get airborne forces in to say seize an airfield, maybe a port. Well, maybe that won't be enough. Maybe the Taiwanese will fight back. And they were also expecting, as I said, their missiles to actually lay waste to Taiwan and just put the Taiwan military on its back so they could pretty much just walk in. Well, the Russians shot some missiles around, and that didn't seem to work as well as anyone expected. They also were not expecting the Americans to stand up, or the Europeans for that matter, and look at what's happened. You've got this supply line pumping in weapons into Ukraine to allow the Ukrainians to kill Russians on almost an industrial scale. And this is being done once again in the face of a nuclear-armed country, the Russians. So maybe that nuclear card doesn't work quite as well as they expected, or it has to be played differently. So there's a number of things that that the Chinese are looking at and say, if we look at what Russia did to Ukraine, all the problems they had, that we're going to have to do things differently. And I've just laid out a number of things that. Another thing that is really as important is the Chinese did not expect the incompetence of the Russian troops in the Russian military in Ukraine, and not having terrible logistics, not being able to get air support and ground operations coordinated. You look at the drone videos of the infantry response to when an armored column gets attacked, and they appear to have no what are called immediate action drills. Basically, the troops run to the other side away from where the shooting is. The Ukrainian internet is still up and running. And you see President Zelensky on the news all the time, as the face of resistance. And the more the Ukrainians have fought back, well, the more the civilized world has been willing to help them. So all of these lessons apply to an attack on Taiwan. And then there's also this recent sinking of the Russian ship, the Moskva, down in the Black Sea by a couple of anti-ship missiles fired by the Ukrainians. Well, you can see the obvious applicability to that if the Chinese are thinking of sending an amphibious force across the Taiwan Strait. So all of these things have to be addressed. If you're, say, a Chinese planner, if you're Xi Jinping, it's not like he's going to be down there with his sleeves rolled up and a couple of number 2 pencils and working out the plans. But the PLA planners are going to have to address all these things. And there's just as much a sort of a military, there's a military aspect to this, there's a political aspect, psychological, there's financial, economic, that all go into his calculations for Taiwan. And this applied before the invasion of Ukraine, but it applies now, but now it just has to be redone.
So if you were in charge of the People's Liberation Army, you've talked about all the things that Russia did that failed, but what are some things that you as the invading force would do to take Taiwan, knowing what you know now about the potential failures?
Oh boy, well, if I was the lead planner of the PLA, I would defect and set up in a house in Santa Barbara on the coast.
If you thought you were, one of the good guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing, why you mention these things, and as I say, there's an aspect of this that you don't really want to give anyone ideas. But most of these things are figure-outable. And you almost don't even have to have military experience to do it. So it's not as if I'm saying anything that nobody can figure out. But also, when you look at how, say, you would do it right, or do it wrong, actually, but do it how you would look at the Taiwan problem after Ukraine if you are a Chinese planner. That it also gives the other side, the free world, the civilized world, it gives them some ideas of what to prepare for. So it's just as helpful as a sort of a thought process for defenders in Taiwan, for the Americans defending Taiwan, as it is as any advantage you could possibly give the Chinese. But first thing, just thinking it through. One of the things that happened in Ukraine that sort of made life difficult for the Russians was the Americans kept revealing the movements the Russians were taking to get their military in order to attack Taiwan. You remember that you hear these, they weren't kind of leaks, but more announcements saying, well, the Russians are going to attack on Thursday at 3 a.m. And apparently the Americans were sharing intelligence with everybody on the planet except me, of course. But they apparently even gave it to the Russians. They apparently gave it to the Chinese. And I would say, sometimes seems as if we want to lose. But what you did have was the Americans revealing some of the preparations the Russians were taking. And what the one thing it does do, it prevents the other side from setting up a narrative. And the Russians were trying to say, well, these Ukrainian Nazis they're gonna murder Russians, so we have to go. And we don't really want to. In fact, the Russians even said, well, we're pulling out now. But the Americans say, by revealing that information, they do make it harder for the other side to set up a sort of a narrative of lies, basically. And also it doesn't help to have your opponent know where your troop movements are, where you're assembling and all that sort of thing. So what the Chinese are probably going to learn from that is that they may need to go from something like a standing start or use deception so that the Americans don't, and I refer to the Americans generally as the leaders of the free world, so the Americans can't see what's going on. They don't have the time to get ready, to get their allies, to get Taiwan prepared for things. So I would expect a very quick assault. Also, you would probably see the Chinese use a lot more missiles, bombs, a lot more force in a very fast, concentrated attack, whereas the Russians didn't really seem to use everything they had. Some of the missile attacks, the bombings, it was kind of small, actually. They didn't hit all that many places. And it seemed as they miscalculated. So the Chinese would probably use a whole lot of stuff and hit all sorts of targets, not just something designed to rattle the Taiwanese, but to really rain fire and brimstone in a lot more places, in a lot more ways than the Russians did. Additionally, you're going to have to do something about air defenses. The Ukrainian air defense, amazingly, is still operating and operating well enough to cause the Russians some real problems. And without having the ability to really control the air and use that in direct support of ground operations, it's a huge disadvantage. So the Chinese will pay special attention to Taiwanese air defenses. Additionally, every time you see President Zelensky appear on the internet or on the news or what have you, and also you see all these pictures of all the devastation that looks like the Mongolians have rolled through someplace, but it looks like these old World War II video shows where you have absolutely demolished cities, you have bodies lying all around. That this sort of thing has really rallied the civilized world on Ukraine's behalf. You have all these videos of Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles getting blown up and dead Russian soldiers. Well, that kind of makes it look like the Ukrainians are doing pretty well. It bolsters the resistance by Ukrainians, and it makes people more willing to support Ukraine. So you have that electronic aspect of the fight. And the Chinese are going to try to completely shut off Ukraine electronically. And that's obviously the internet communications, maybe hit the undersea cables, take out any satellite coverage that the Taiwanese have, and maybe interfere with some of the American satellite coverage. But you want to, if you're Chinese, you want to, as I say, isolate electronically as much as you can, because that is something that's given the Ukrainians a huge advantage. You have also will want to sanctions-proof your economy if you can, to the extent possible. And China has a somewhat different dynamic when it comes to an economy than the Russians do. So one of the big things that the Chinese have been trying, but unsuccessfully actually, to do is to make themselves less vulnerable to the US dollar, to sanctions applied that cut them off from the US dollar network, for example. But back to the military end of it, the Chinese are going to have to figure out some way to eliminate the anti-ship missile threat, the sea mine threat from the Taiwanese that makes it very hard for an amphibious force that's trying to attack. The Russians have been trying to slip in, I think, an amphibious assault somewhere down on the south coast, and they haven't been able to do it. So the Chinese are going to have to put their heads together and try and figure that out. And once again, you have to figure out a way to lessen any sort of capabilities that the Taiwanese have for resisting or successfully hitting back against an amphibious assault. And also the air defense aspect I mentioned earlier. If you're going to try to get helicopters in, or airborne forces, or forces to bring in resupply, to bring in follow-on troops, you're going to have to do something about that. So those are the things that they're going to have to concentrate on. And they're going to, of course, be counting on their friends in America to sort of influence in Washington, on Wall Street, just to say, look, this is an internal squabble between the Chinese people. We don't really want to get into it. It's too much risk for our economy. We don't want Americans to die on this behalf, in a war like this. So they're going to play that political warfare angle, both not just in Taiwan, but in America as well. And that's something that they've got to figure out, because it hasn't been working as well lately as it had for an awful long time. So those are some of the considerations, and I'm sure I'll think of a few more in a minute. But you look at what the Russians have done, and the Chinese, as I say, will be doing the calculations to try to overcome those.